Okay, so we're going to install 3 Linux machines as part of the test environment for Kubernetes. This is a video to show you how to do that. On my system, I'm running a Mac, and I'm running VMware Fusion. And so using Fusion, we're going to install 3 Linux Ubuntu 16.04 workstations, right? So let's do that. So here I already have my VMware installed. I'm going to go up to New, and I'm going to install from disk. I already have my image added to the folder, and this is what I'm using, Ubuntu 16.04 desktop. I'm actually using the workstation. You don't have to use the workstation, you can use the server. But one thing to keep in mind, this is very important, you have to use a 64-bit, which typically in the description for Linux, it says AMD. So don't get confused by this. I got confused by this and I lost a lot of time. I actually built an entire cluster with the 32-bit i386 Linux images, and then you get to a point where Linux installs fine, but when you try to install Kubernetes, it fails. And in fact, it fails and it doesn't even tell you that it's failing because it's 32-bit. So this is very important. You have to install 64-bit, and the problem here is that most of the Linux installation media, when they refer to 64-bit, they don't say i386. They just say AMD, and that got me confused because obviously I have an Intel machine. So the point is, get a 64-bit Linux. If you want to follow exactly, I would recommend you get the 16.04 desktop. It says AMD 64, and that's what we're going to use. So here we go. So we're going to hit continue. Depending on the type of installation you have, depending on the type of hypervisor, some of these questions may get asked in advance. Some of these questions get asked after you've installed Linux or during the setup of the actual Linux. In this case, I haven't even booted the media yet, and VMware Fusion is asking me for this kind of information. Okay, so this is interesting that, depending on when you get this, you may not get this screen asking you for these credentials. This is considered the easy install, and so VMware Fusion has a feature where it can prompt me for these things now as opposed to later during the actual setup of the operating system. So I'm going to hit continue. There's one other thing I'm going to do. You probably don't have to do this if you're okay with 2 gigabytes of RAM and a 20 gig hard drive. You should be fine with this, but I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to change a couple of things. I'm going to change the name of my machines because I'm going to name them 71, 72, and 73. This is just to help me organize myself. Eventually, I'm going to have many of these, and these 71 is actually the last octet of my IP address that I plan to use for these. And for me, it's just easy for me to identify them based on that number. So my cluster number 1 is going to have .71, .72, and .73. So I'm naming this Ubuntu 71. This is actually the file name within my folders. Not too relevant, but I like to keep everything consistent. Okay, so the last thing I'm going to do here is I'm going to go to processors, and because I have enough horsepower here, I'm going to assign 2, and I'm going to assign 4096 for 4 gig of RAM. Now, I do recommend on the primary or master node that you do give it 4 gig. On the second and third nodes, you can give 2 gig if you like. But because I have the RAM, I'm actually going to go higher in this case. Okay. So we're going to keep this at 2 cores and 4096. I'm not really specifying any additional features. I would recommend just leaving everything at default. That's pretty much it. I guess the only other thing I can change is my display settings. I'm going to choose the resize option so that I can resize the windows. You really shouldn't have to deal with any of the rest of these settings for the VM. Okay, now I'm going to hit go. And now is when the actual installation starts for this particular VM. Okay, now Ubuntu 16.04 is pretty advanced and pretty slick, where it's really not going to prompt me for much. It's going to go about doing its thing. And so, in fact, what I'm going to do is I'm going to start my next machine as well. Okay, so I'm going to do File New. I'm going to do the second machine at the same time. Okay, so I'm going to do the same thing that you saw before. This, for me, it's going to be 72. And like I did before, I'm going to give it 2 gig and 4096. And my display settings, I'm going to do resize. That's pretty much it. And then this one is going to start. And in fact, I'm going to do one more. Now, this is just a test environment, so I'm not going crazy with the passwords, but you could put the password as you like. This is my machine number 73. Again, same deal. Relatively simple settings. And now I have 3 machines running that are installing. Okay, so if I go back to the first one, I'll get this library out of the way. You can see that this is almost finished. So I'll come back to these once they're finished, and I'll show you the settings that we need to do in each one. Okay, so at this point we can see that one of my machines is ready. However, before I log into it, I want to do a couple of things to its network adapter, which were not done before. So if you could either do it from here, or I'm going to go to settings, and I'm going to go to network. I guess I should have done this before. I am going to set this to a different network that I have created. This is a NAT network within VMware. This is a NAT network in VMware. And what this does is I just happen to pick my own subnet for my lab environment. I want this environment to have the 172.16.16 network. So when I numbered the 71, 72, 73, that was the last octet of this network. Okay, so I'm going to leave it like this. The other thing I like to do just for fun is if you go in here, I guess you can't do this when the machine is on, so I'll have to shut it off. So let's power down the 3 machines. I should have done it earlier. So the second one is also done. I'm going to shut it down. Third one is still shutting down. It's still installing, I mean. So here what we're going to do is I'm going to go to settings. I'm going to go to network. Oops. And I'm going to do something interesting. I'm going to change the MAC address, just the last 3 octets, to match my number. Okay, and this is just for me to be, to when I look at the MAC addresses, because in Kubernetes and in various screens, we like to see the MAC address, and this just helps me recognize which machine it is, that's all. Really not a big deal, but it's just for fun. So I'm going to close this, and then I'm going to boot this machine up. 72, I'm going to do the same thing. So I'm going to go to its settings, go to network. I'm going to pick this network, and I'm going to change this to 72. Okay. And this machine also seems to have finished installing, so we're going to shut it down. This is going to be 73. Okay, and we're going to start it up. So here's my 3 machines. I'll position these like this. And now there's some work we have to do within each of these before we ever get to installing Docker or anything else. So first thing I'm going to do is just set up my shortcut. So I want to put terminal here, and I want to put the network settings right here. And if we go to terminal, you can see that I do not have an IP address. Okay, this is because I changed the MAC address, but if you notice, at least my MAC addresses are a little bit more obvious now, right? So in order to change the IP address, you can do this the hard way or the easy way. Because we have workstation, this is probably good if you're not too familiar with Linux. This is probably the best Linux for you to use because a lot of the GUI control panels are available. So what we're going to do is we're going to go in here, we're going to go into options, and in here we're going to change this from DHCP to manual. The net mask is 24-bit, and the gateway is unique for your hypervisor. In my case, it is .2. And I'm going to also install a real internet DNS. I'm installing 2 DNS servers. And in my case, I'm actually shutting off IP6 just to make life a little bit simpler here. Okay, so that's pretty much it. Let's see. I guess it is already saved. Oh, what happened? It didn't give me an option to save. Okay, so there we go. So now you can see that my IP is 71. The default gateway is .2. I have my DNS, and I should be able to see that here. So I have my IP address, which is 172.16.16.71. I could ping the IP, and let's see if we could ping names. So there we go. Okay, so let's go fix that on the others, and then we'll come back and there's more to do here. So we're going to do term, and I'm going to copy this here. I'm going to do network, and this is the network control panel, right? So again, we're going to go into the network control panel, do options. We are going to go to IP4, change it to manual, add an address. This, by the way, there's just a space in between these IPs. Don't put any other symbols. Okay, so I'm going to hit save here. And if I go to this, I should be able to see my IP is now .72. If you notice my MAC address, little trick that I did, is also now 72s. And I can ping and resolve names on the internet. So one more. Here we go. So here we're going to hit search, terminal, network. We're going to go into network, options, IP4, manual, add. This is 73, mask of 24, gateway. Okay, so there we go. And let's just see that this has the correct information. So I have an IP of .73. My MAC address is what I had set. And there you go, I can ping the internet. Now, there's one other thing. It's not really written, or I didn't really read this, it wasn't obvious to me when I did this, but in Kubernetes, once you install Kubernetes a little bit later, it's very important that the host names of the machines be unique and resolvable. So if you notice, I can ping the host name, but that's not magically happening. That is happening because there has been a host entry already created. The problem is all 3 of these are the same name. So what we have to do is we have to change the names of these. So I'm going to do sudo hostname Ubuntu 71. And now I have changed the hostname, although you see it doesn't show up here until you come back into terminal and you'll see my hostname. Now the problem that happens because of this simple change is my name is not resolvable anymore. So this is going to cause a lot of headache later on if this is not corrected now. But the way to correct this is we have to edit the host file. So this is what I'm going to do: sudo nano space /etc/hosts. And you see how it's giving me trouble already, even just running basic commands. There's an error that has come up, which is not relative to what I'm doing, but still it's coming up. And this is the problem. You're going to have all kinds of weird things if that's not done. So here I am, and basically all we want to do is change this to the new name. That's pretty much it. Now I like to also add the real IP as part of this. And then because I'm using nano, you do Control X, you press Y, and you press enter, and it's done. And if you want to, just for fun, if you want to see what I did, these are the two things that I did. I edited this one, it said Ubuntu, I put 71 next to it, and then I added another line to represent this particular name. Now, if I do, it actually is resolvable. This is pretty important for the Kubernetes to function properly. So let's go do the same thing on 72. So as you notice, I changed the name, and I like to see the name correct, so I'm going to get into terminal again. I'm going to go into here and correct this name. Make sure you put the correct IPs in here, otherwise you're asking for another nightmare. Okay, so this is now 72. Oops. So if you hit Control Z by mistake while you're using VI or Nano or any other command line tool, what happens is you really don't save anything, you don't undo anything. This is coming just from my Windows, Control Z to undo things, and I press Control Z by mistake right now instead of Control X. But you notice what happens here. The app that I was using, which was Nano, has been suspended and sent to the background. That's what Control Z does in Linux if you're not aware of that. So in order to bring this back, you have to type in FG all by itself, which basically brings the background app to the foreground. That's what FG is. And I'm back where I was, and I can do the correct Control X, which is what I wanted. And then you get this prompt here, and you press Y, press enter. And I like to make sure that it worked. Okay, so here's my two lines that I did. And I can now ping this machine's host name. One more. Here we go. This is now my machine number 73. Okay. So now I have that name. I'm going to go into the host file, and we're going to do the same thing, 73. So there we go. Now remember, Control X, not Control Z. Y, enter. And you can see that I have this. And then the last thing is to ping Ubuntu 73. There we go. Now, if you were using Minikube, or there's a couple of systems where you can have a full Kubernetes cluster on one node, then the part of the instructions for setting up that type of thing is you do need to have the host name and the IP. You need a host entry for each of the three nodes on all three nodes. Okay, and that is because you're not really running a full DNS in that Minikube environment. And so each of the three nodes really needs to have a host entry. In our case, when we install Kubernetes, we're actually going to have DNS helping us. And so you don't really need to do that right now. Right now, all I did is each of the 3 nodes just has its own name corrected. That's really it. If you, well, you're going to have to correct the names because you don't want 3 machines with the same name, right? So this process is going to happen. Now, because there is an 1804 Ubuntu out, I'm getting this message. I'm going to say, don't upgrade on all 3 of them because we want to stick with 1604, not 1804. The reason we're sticking to 1604 is because 1804 is relatively, obviously 2 years newer. That's what the 18 stands for. It's the year 2018 that it came out. This is from 2016, but some of the other versions of Kubernetes and other components that I install may not work correctly on 1804. So if you want the easiest, painless method of following along with me, I would suggest you stick with 1604, because then at least the versions that I use for Docker and Kubernetes and for everything else, if you stick to the same versions that I'm providing, you should not have any trouble, right? Or at least any incompatibility. So far, we have 3 Linux machines installed. We have simply given them 3 IP addresses, and we also have corrected their host names in the systems. Okay, so the next step is going to be to go on and update all 3. I'll come back in the next video for that.